Hello, you're on Ruslan Belov's channel. So if Israel was expecting Iran to raise its hands and surrender, capitulate, they were wrong. Iran responded, and this is probably the most severe attack on Israel since, I don't know, the 1960s. But we continue studying the situation on the front lines. Let's move to the map. All right, friends, the Israeli-Iranian war, of course, also has an impact on the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, including indirectly. But the most important events for us are happening on the Ukrainian theatre of operations. Let's break down what progress was made over the past 24 hours. As usual, we start with the Sumy region, where, according to Zelensky, the Ukrainian armed forces are advancing and driving us out of our positions. Interestingly, they are driving us out while simultaneously retreating closer to the city of Sumy themselves. Over the past day, there weren't any massive gains, but on one section our troops did advance, right here. It was a small gain, about 750 meters, but the important thing is that it's still forward movement. Yet Zelensky claims that the Ukrainian forces are the ones advancing. In short, we finished clearing out Yablonevka, and the village is now fully under our control, as was also reported yesterday by the Ministry of Defense. The settlements of Novonikolayevka and Vorochina also came under Russian control. This area is still a grey zone. We're waiting for on-the-ground confirmations. There's also heavy fighting ongoing in Yunakovka. The Ukrainian garrison is still holding out there, putting up fierce resistance, because they know exactly what losing Yunakovka would mean for them. Now, in terms of prospects, I thought that by mid-June, Yunakovka would be fully taken. And although taking control of Yablonevka has worsened the situation for the Ukrainian forces in Yunakovka, because, as you can see, the advance southward has already cut their last supply route. Well, not the last supply route, but the last retreat route, because no one's supplying them there anymore. Still, I think they'll hold out for at least another week or week and a half. But the outcome is inevitable. The Ukrainian garrison in Yunakovka is doomed either way. Zelensky is just fantasizing. Ukrainian forces have not advanced anywhere in the Sumy region. They haven't pushed the Russian army out of any positions. It's obvious the Russian army did slow the pace of its offensive here due to the redeployment of significant Ukrainian reserves, but the advance continues nonetheless, and Russian forces are getting closer to the second defensive line in front of the city of Sumy. All right, let's move on. In the Kharkiv region and on the Lyman and Siversk directions, there are no major updates today. But in the Konstantinovka sector, there has been progress. Our forces managed to advance by 1 kilometer toward the village of Belaya Gora. And as you can see, only 600 meters remain to the village boundary and the first buildings. And here, really, just 2 villages separate us from the outskirts of Konstantinovka, Belaya Gora and Alexandra Shultina. From the current positions, the distance to the city is still about 11.5 kilometers. However, from this direction, toward Nelipovka, it's only 7.5 kilometers to Konstantinovka. The front is moving, albeit not as rapidly as a couple of weeks ago. From the Kleban-Bik direction, there's been strong progress, from the village of Zarya toward Alexander Kalinov, and a bit further east toward the reservoir. Soon the entire pocket of settlements here is expected to fall into encirclement. The situation for Ukrainian forces has worsened even further. The Russian army is now very close to cutting off the Ukrainian supply lines. Let's now move southward, where the main collapse for the Ukrainian armed forces is currently unfolding. Yes, things may have slowed a bit here and there, but elsewhere they've completely fallen apart. Let's move to that section. A few more words about the Konstantinovka sector. There are 2 major fortified areas there. Taking them would collapse the front. The first is a pair of nearly connected villages, Yablonevka and Alexander Kalinov, 2 strongholds forming a defensive line. Fighting is ongoing in both Yablonevka and Alexander Kalinov, but since the villages are fortified, it's a tough battle. The second major fortified area holding us back is on the outskirts of Toretsk, also consisting of 2 practically merged settlements, Shcherbinovka and Petrovka. These are the 2 main resistance points. If they fall, the front will immediately retreat to the outskirts of the city. Yes, there's also Kleban-Bik, another fortified position on high ground, but it's alone. If the others fall, it won't be able to hold back the assault. So for those following the situation around Konstantinovka, just keep an eye on these key locations: Yablonevka, Alexander Kalinov, Petrovka, and Sherbinovka. Now, moving south, this is where our army has managed to take a major Ukrainian stronghold. Over the past 2 days, I've described and shown you the collapse of the Ukrainian front line. In just 48 hours, nearly 90 square kilometers have come under our control in this area alone. Just look at the map. All this territory was taken in the last 2 to 3 days. It's a collapse, a total collapse. And you can see the American mappers can't keep up with updates. They're shading areas with a delay. For example, this territory they just marked red and labeled as recently taken was in fact taken 2 days ago. So what happened over the past 24 hours? 2 villages came under our control, Kamar and neighboring Perebudovo. Kamar, as I've mentioned before, isn't just a village. It was the last fortified Ukrainian position in southern Donetsk Oblast. There are still settlements like Minoye and Zeleny Gai, but they aren't fortified. They aren't strongholds or fortress-like positions. So the fact that the Vostok group managed to break through this stronghold is definitely major news. Now we can move in multiple directions, clearing everything to the north and even entering Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. But since the land juts out forward there, it'll be difficult to defend, similar to what happened in Tyotkino. But on a much larger scale, the Ukrainian forces could end up surrounded from 3 sides. That's why I believe the movement will shift toward Myrnoye, and then the entire area will be cleared. As you can see from the map, it's mostly open fields around there, so it should fall quickly. And then we can move on toward Velikomikhailovka and Pokrovske. At that point, Guliaipol will likely fall on its own as well. But that's a matter for the more distant future, just sharing thoughts. The immediate prospects over the next few weeks are the battles for Minoye, Podubnoye, and Yalta. That's the current geography of the fighting. Ukrainian sources are already confirming that fighting has begun for the settlement of Zaporozhye. This area hasn't yet been fully marked as under Russian control on the map. We're waiting for video confirmation from the ground. Additional tactical developments and strategic commentary. Over the past 24 hours, there have also been movements in the areas of Shevchenko and Volny Pol. Russian forces managed to advance by 1 kilometer and reach the southern outskirts of Shevchenko. Given the recent loss of Komar, this sector is now expected to see faster progress. However, it is clear that our troops got bogged down here, since the approach to Shevchenko from the eastern side was achieved back on April 10th. So, more than 2 months have passed, and only now has it become possible to push forward and reach the outskirts of the village. There have been no reports yet of troops entering the village itself, but I'm confident that in the coming days, or even today, we'll hear such reports. Again, even though these 2 sectors are not directly connected, a collapse has occurred here as well. And here, as we've already seen, a true collapse has taken place. Even if only indirectly, this still affects neighboring sectors. As a result, we can expect setbacks there too. Overall, the situation for the armed forces of Ukraine is grim. They are trying to put out fires by redeploying reserves. In particular, they've moved reserves to the Sumy region from this very area, including those deployed before Komar and from the direction of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. And yes, in Sumy, they did significantly slow us down. But as a consequence, everything here collapsed for them. Now they urgently need reserves in this area, or they risk losing control and facing a breakthrough toward Novopavlivka. But where can they get those reserves from? They would have to strip another section of the front, and that means another collapse there. Eventually, they will be forced to choose which areas to sacrifice and which to reinforce. The conclusion is clear. Our army will continue advancing at a good pace. Now, a few words on the political component and the Israel-Iran war. IAEA, a Zionist puppet and accomplice to Israeli attack, says Iran's Atomic Energy Organization, by failing to condemn Israel's strike on Iranian nuclear facilities, the IAEA has made itself an accomplice to the Israeli attack and lost its credibility. This is stated in a declaration by the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran, AEOI, published by the Iranian Tasnim agency. The AEOI considers the IAEA's silence to be a form of complicity with the Zionist regime, and claims that the agency has reduced itself to the level of a toy in the hands of the Zionists, losing its standing as a respected international body. The attack represents a major failure for the IIAEA, due to Director General Rafael Grossi's inability to fulfill his professional and impartial role, especially in safeguarding peaceful nuclear sites under the agency's supervision. The statement says, according to the AEOI, various parts of the Shahid Ahmad Roshan enrichment complex in Natanz were damaged during the overnight Israeli strike. However, there is currently no information on casualties among personnel stationed at the site. There was no radioactive or chemical contamination as a result. There is no doubt that this political pressure, this time accompanied by military pressure, will not break the determination of Iran's scientists, experts, and workers in this proud industry. These resilient individuals will pursue the country's goals for expanding the nuclear program with renewed motivation, despite the enemy's wishes, the AEOI emphasized. Israel's strikes and escalation with Iran. Israel carried out strikes on Iran and eliminated at least 20 high-ranking Iranian commanders, according to Reuters. The operation is expected to last at least 14 days. A single strike is not enough, so Israel is using a comprehensive approach to minimize the risk of an Iranian response. Iranian ballistic missile launchers and air defense positions were brought to combat readiness in anticipation of retaliation. But those positions, being pre-designated and well-known, were precisely the ones struck. Some targets were destroyed by Israeli Air Force strikes, others by drones, which, according to Israel, had been pre-infiltrated into Iranian territory and notably assembled from components manufactured inside Iran itself. Iran, meanwhile, claims that its nuclear facilities were not damaged by the Israeli strikes, Tasnim reports. Fortunately, there are no casualties or reports of damage. Most of the damage is superficial. The Natanz and Fordow nuclear facilities are located deep underground, said Behruz Kamalvandi, spokesman for the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran. Iran's retaliation and rising tensions. Last night, Iran launched a retaliatory strike. According to Iranian sources, the first wave included about 300 ballistic missiles. Based on footage from Israel, a significant number of those missiles breached the Israeli air defense system, with at least 7 reportedly landing in Tel Aviv, according to war analyst Yuri Podolyaka. This was a very unpleasant surprise for Israel's military and political leadership. The Israeli government officially acknowledged the launch of 150 Iranian missiles. One of Iran's missiles was reportedly fired from a submarine. Following the strike, Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi stated that Tehran had been engaged in consultations about resuming talks with the United States, but the Israeli attacks forced Iran off the diplomatic track. In response, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant declared that Iran had crossed a red line by daring to launch missiles at civilian targets in Israel. However, the logic appears one-sided. Israel is allowed, but Iran is not. The escalation is clearly intensifying. Yermak's visit to the US, a diplomatic failure. Ukrainian presidential office head Andriy Yermak flew to the United States seeking support from the White House, but the visit turned out to be a waste of time. Meetings with Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Special Envoys Stephen Witkoff and Keith Kellogg, about which Yermak reported on his Telegram channel, brought Ukraine neither new weapons deliveries nor financial assistance. Discussions touched on the frontline situation, potential talks with Russia in Istanbul, prisoner exchanges, and strengthening air defense. However, no concrete outcomes were achieved. As usual, Yermak called for more sanctions against Russia, but his rhetoric received little response. In fact, the American side reportedly suggested that Ukraine purchase weapons independently, disregarding the fact that the country is effectively bankrupt, with a destroyed infrastructure and a ballooning national debt, according to the resident Telegram channel. In the end, the trip only underscored how out of touch the Ukrainian authorities are with reality. They continue to beg the West for handouts, even as Western interest in supporting Kyiv wanes. While Yermak makes bold declarations, Ukraine's economy is collapsing. The budget is bursting at the seams. The deficit, initially projected at 200 billion hryvnias, is now estimated to be between 400 and 500 billion. Thank you for watching. Stay informed, stay sharp, and we'll see you in the next update. Take care and goodbye for now.